coffee houses, clubs, and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light.
Good one, Chris. It's a good one. All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. And I'm one half, Rich Baris, the People's Pundit. Robert will be joining us soon. Look, all of the stuff we're going to talk about today, the common thread here, are broken, perhaps never really not broken systems of everything, of government, of elections, just collapsing. Just coming to fruition, right? So we have a lot to talk about with the audits, all right? And if you watched, I told you guys last week, this is his niche. This is what he does. I'm trying to get a clip and to put it up and show you to watch the Don Smith interviews with one, Andy Biggs, Representative Andy Biggs from Arizona, and two, Vernon Jones, Republican candidate for governor in the state of Georgia, running against sitting Governor Kemp, all right, who told erroneously all of his voters, his base, people who didn't vote for him, that his election, overseen by Crappy Burger, was the most secure, and that the audits were legit. Look, I'm going to go over, I guess, some things are on the line here. But we are going to talk about, so far, what we know has been found. But I will tell you unequivocally, and maybe I should wait until the lawyer comes on. But I know I struck a chord with some of you on Twitter. But look, you will follow me, not because I tell you what you want to hear. None of you. Not the right, not the left. People follow me because I tell them what they need to hear. And the fact of the matter is, there is no legal mechanism. There is no constitutional mechanism to undo or decertify electors in a presidential election. Could it happen in a Senate? You know, Laura, the Senate is a little bit different. I'll ask Robert to get his take about that. I have seen instances of congressmen recalled. I have seen entire elections get thrown out and redone. Never this late, however. All right? Not that I can remember. Perhaps it did happen. Robert's the history encyclopedia too, so between the two of us, maybe we can find an example. But I'm thinking, I remember some Senate problems, but that was really, a lot of that was pre-17th, 16th log rolling. So the ones I'm thinking about in my head, they were recalled because the process, you know, the state legislature's process was like called into question and whatnot. But in any event, maybe there should be, but there's not. And there has been presidencies that have been in doubt before. As Robert likes to joke with Joe Biden, his, what does he call him? His illegitimate the second? I let him say it when he comes on. But this is Patrick Buchanan, right? And then you could seriously argue, look what happened with Kennedy, where it was a much clearer case right off the bat. Richard Nixon knew about it. And the difference with Donald Trump and Richard Nixon is that people in the Republican Party did want Richard Nixon to challenge the results of the 1960 election. Richard Nixon, by all accounts, more than likely won, defeated JFK. JFK's daddy bought those votes in Chicago and West Virginia and other places. All right. And God knows what Lyndon Baines Johnson did in Texas. All right. So the bottom line is, this was Donald Trump and he had no friends because they hated him. Our entire media system and how we report these facts, because if you go to like PolitiFact or whatever, factcheck.org, whatever cheesy fake fact checker is your favorite, if you go to them right now, it'll say, no, auditors didn't find mass fraud in the 2020 election in Arizona. Well, that's a nice cute play on words. They absolutely found discrepancies. They're irregularities. Absolutely. It's not even, that's without a doubt. Here's the problem we have. People like me, who have done this for many, many years, just like the rest of the media, have no incentive to tell you the truth. This is the problem we have in this country with the corrupt corporate media. They have no incentive to tell you the truth, because if you're one of those chodes, would you want to say, wait a minute, wait, stop for a second. You know what? I was wrong. There was something. They told you Joe Biden was going to carry these states. They told you Joe Biden was going to win. They have zero incentive to tell you the truth on these matters, on these audits. They have every incentive to try to do what Dave Wasserman did to Adams in the New York City mayoral race. Jump on him immediately, vilify him, call him a liar, say there's no evidence, that's a conspiracy theory. Oh my God, what are you, a mini Trump? Trump 2.0? Meanwhile, if the moron could do basic arithmetic, he would have seen that there were, in fact, 130 plus thousand test ballots that were counted. His fraudulency the second. Yeah, that's what he calls them. That's it. So what do we know right now? What have they said so far? And I really feel badly for some people on Twitter who just, they don't know how to consume information themselves. And they listen to these people who just lie. The idea that Cyber Ninja is some like partisan hack firm is a Democratic talking point that they put in place because they knew when these irregularities were revealed that they would have a way to slam them. They can't go out and tell you they're a credible organization. Maricopa County, the official Twitter account, lied in every word they tweeted the other day, which I pointed out. First, you did agree to audit the results in the beginning. Not like that matters. Because you don't have the damn power to decide whether or not you're going to comply, as the courts have affirmed. The state legislature has the sole authority to order you to do it or not, to comply or not. I don't know who the hell you think you are. You only started to cry like little babies when things just didn't smell right. That's when you said, remember, enough is enough. That's when enough became enough. When your palates didn't match. Now, there could be a lot of good explanations for some of the stuff that Voter Georgia and Cyber Ninja are finding. Cyber Ninja in Arizona, Voter Georgia, who's just looking at a small piece of what's going on in Fulton County. And I have told you, Robert has told you, do not hyper-focus on these counties. These problems were everywhere. We rapidly changed our electoral process 60 days before an election. And we expected officials to do a perfect, clean, and in good faith job. What Cyber Ninja effectively said at the hearing, all right, or what the gentleman effectively said, wait until there's a stamped report, is that it is impossible to fully audit the election in Maricopa County. Folks, oh, and by the way, let me go back to another lie Maricopa said real quick, which is that, we didn't agree to have an uncertified auditor. Whoa! That sounds terrible! Republicans got someone who's not certified to audit an election? Oh my God, there is no such thing! It doesn't exist! They lie like you drink water. They need to. They need it. They need it to survive.
Their mouths are open.
If their mouths are open, they're lying. Politicians. There is no such freaking thing. Yes, there is a process that state legislatures, Texas being probably one of the models, to be able to certify certain election systems. So, if you want to have a contractor who's trying to sell software to help you count your votes, that has to, in most states, that has to go through a pretty rigorous process. Some states are more rigorous than others, and Texas is by far the strongest statutory language that says, whether or not something can be trusted or not. Maricopa is just making crap up. That county hasn't been honest since Fontes started, since he took over, Fontes took over as the recorder. That county hasn't been honest with you, the voters, from the jump. And who the hell is going to tell you the truth on this? Fox News? They played the role of Judas on election night to call forget about irresponsible. That's not even the word. Corrupt is the word. That call on election night was indefensible. Indefensible. Who are they going to... So it's like I'm telling you, everything's broken. So we're supposed to rely on who? Them? To tell you the truth? Their decision desk put their credibility on the line, took a dump, and flushed it down the toilet that night. They're not going to go back and say, well, looks like all those critics were right. Joe Biden may not have won on state.
Shame on you, Fox.
Shame on you.
Shame.
That was a pretext. Because they needed the narrative. We can stop counting. Donald Trump has lost a must-win state. And they freaking know it. Chris Steyerwalt, you freaking know it. All of you.
Those 15 pieces of
You're all a bunch of Democratic donors pretending to be conservatives. You're a bunch of frauds who can't even do your jobs correct anyway. You see the report on your polling? It was abysmal. Which, by the way, you should all stop relying on the backs of all of those you smear leading up to elections to make your averages look better than they are. Because if you took out all the polls that everyone loves to hate, then those averages would have been worse, which is why we did after the election. That's why we showed you their favorite pollsters. The New York Times, Monmouth, Quinnipiac, Fox, CNN, Langer Research for ABC, Biden plus 17 in Wisconsin. We took them all out. No, you can't rely on Robert. You can't rely on me. You can't rely on Jim to make you look better. You smear everybody during the election for being too pro-Trump, whatever the hell that means. You can't be pro anything until the election is done. Then you know which way you were pro or not pro. They weren't off by 4.5 points in the States. They were off by 9 points in the States.
That's way beyond.
Do we need to go over it again? Morning console. Biden plus 11. Nate Cohn at the New York Times for Siena. Biden plus 9. Biden plus 9. Biden plus 11. That's in Midwest. Biden plus 4 in Ohio. Biden plus 1 in Iowa. Do we need to keep going on? Biden plus 6 in North Carolina. Biden plus 6 in Florida. 9-point miss. A 9-point miss.
Why are you still in business?
13-point miss in Ohio. 7-point miss in Iowa. Then you get to pretend like the average is the authority at the end of the day. How nice of a system you got. There's something else to game, like that's what you do. You game everything. Don't use Robert or Matt or Jim.
Or you.
Should be carrying their water. Should be their water boy until you figure out how to play big ball like a big boy. Want to be an NFL, you know? You want to be an NFL star. You don't even know how to catch the pigskin. That's the same thing. Like, you want to go to the All-Stars, but you haven't swung your bat correctly in like 9, 10 games in a row. Like, this is the way. I'm trying to come up with sports analogies the fraud can maybe understand since he comes from that arena. Till they threw him out for being less than mediocre. In any event, this is what we know so far. Nearly 74,000 and change absentee ballots of no record of being sent. This is what they're alleging. What do I mean by that? I mean that people didn't request these ballots. There was no date which they could find that said this ballot was requested, this ballot was sent, this ballot was returned, this ballot was processed, this ballot was counted. A little something called chain of custody is pretty damn important after all. There's over 11,000 voters. We're calling them the ethereal voters. They didn't exist on the voter rolls until December 4th, yet they voted in an election in November. Hey, look, don't get mad at me. I'm just reporting what I heard, what I'm hearing here. There are 18,000, roughly, who hadn't voted, many of them, in a very long time, probably should not have been on the rolls, voted and were subsequently removed almost immediately after the election from the voter rolls. That's a little weird. Look, this is what I was telling you 60, 90 days before the election. There very well could be some explanations for a lot of this. The problem is, when you have a system that is so easily exploited, human beings will exploit it. John Adams. If men were angels, we wouldn't need the law. If a system cannot be fully audited, then a system is inherently flawed and corrupted, even, dare I say. And if it wasn't corrupted, it sure as hell will be in the future when people know that they can get away with something. You understand what I'm saying? Leave the bank vault open and tell them that there are no police to come and arrest you.
No cameras.
There are no cameras. There are no fingerprints. There are nothing.
Let's see how long that.
Let's see how long the vault is emptied. How quickly it takes for the vault to be emptied. go to a bar, pop your butt down on a stool next to a known car thief, slam 3, get up to drink, get up to take a leak, and leave your keys on the bar and see if when you come back, your car is still in the parking lot. The sad part is, like I said, folks, they have every incentive to lie to you and zero incentive to tell you the truth. They have already staked it on Biden +6 in Arizona. Do you understand what I'm telling you?
They have everything.
People know this is not normal. This doesn't happen. Voter Georgia is claiming they have barely peeked into the truth of it. Into the entire, I mean, we're talking about a tiny chisel off the top here, off the surface. By the way, as I've shown you, majority of voters in Georgia believe that vote by mail led to fraud. I mean, we know this. We've polled now multiple times. And if we were right about David Perdue and John Ossoff, and we were right about Kelly Loeffler and Raphael Warnock, then we were right about their feelings towards these issues. You understand? That's why accuracy matters. That's why results matter. That's why track records matter. Who the hell cares what Monmouth shows, what Quinnipiac shows when it comes to how people feel about things? Who the hell cares? If they can't poll an election right, they can't tell you what people are feeling. Accuracy matters. Scratch the surface of it, there are apparently 4,500 or so votes that are non-existent right off the bat, and about 3,900 of those votes went for Joe Biden. The rest of them went to Donald Trump. We have another one where what they're saying is that the audit slips are, which are signed, redacted, are the erroneous errors. One other batch cost Joe Biden about 300 votes. So when you put it together, Joe Biden's lead in Georgia, just scratching the surface, slips to 2,000 votes. This is why Robert and I said it was very important for Crappy Burger to keep his promise and put those scans up. Why it was very important for somebody else, an independent group, to go in and look at what these people have done, because they have no incentive to tell you the truth. They have every incentive to lie to you. Again, let me see real quick. I'm just going to check, and I hope it doesn't drop anything here, but let me check and see if I got that clip for that interview. Look, like I said, Vernon Jones interviewed by Don Smith of The Don Smith Show during CPAC in Texas. And Vernon was going into very specific examples. We are looking at problems with these drop boxes and chain of custody issues. The voters in Georgia, as they do nationally, oppose drop boxes. Mm-hmm. They oppose harvest and want bans on both. And when I say the people, I mean more than 6 in 10 either strongly oppose or oppose drop boxes and ballot harvesting. Had we just stuck with the will of the people and done things the way we have always done them, we wouldn't even be in this mess. Why does this matter? Because the effort and the intent to suppress thought, the intention to suppress thought and to suppress different points of view never works. It only forces the discussion underground, leads to greater distrust, greater lack of credibility with the institutions in this country. Whether, and we're going to talk about this when Robert comes on, and I may need to, he is there. Why on earth?
It didn't pop up.
It didn't pop up. Sorry, Jesus, Robert. How long you been waiting there, my friend? Man, that ain't funny. Yeah. Let me bring on Robert. I had no idea it was there. I was waiting for the alert. It usually brings an alert. Mm-hmm. Robert, can you hear me, my friend?
Oh yeah, no problem. Can you hear me?
I am. Yeah, man. I'm sorry about that. How long you been sitting in the queue?
No problem. Not too long. Not too long at all.
Okay, jeez,
I
man.
think he's being sweet.
He's being
but that's
honest.
okay.
He's being modest, isn't he? Shit. Robert, what the hell is going on here, man? And then PolitiFact and all of them immediately jumped to. There's no widespread irregularity. And actually, they said fraud, which is kind of funny how they did that, because we're not really there yet, are we? I mean, we're just talking about things that don't match, they don't make sense. So they're real cute with their words, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, the two things we pointed out from the get-go was widespread is irrelevant. What matters is were there more questionable ballots than the margin of victory in the individual states.
That's right.
And the second part was fraud is also irrelevant, because again, it's all just whether is the ballot a questionable ballot. A person could have intended to cast a legal ballot, and they just didn't follow the rules. And we have these rules for a reason. Same thing, like you show up at the ballot box or the voting booth an hour late after the voting was closed. Well, you don't get to vote. I mean, that doesn't. If your vote is counted, that isn't necessarily fraudulent, but it's illegal. It's a vote that could not count constitutionally. And that's what the Arizona audit is outing. That's what parts of the Georgia partial audit are outing. That's what the Pennsylvania and Wisconsin audit likely would out. That's what part of they found in Michigan. So it's no surprise. I mean, the margins were simply too close for this to be outside of the margin of fraud, or in this context, the margin of constitutionally questionable ballots from a legal perspective. So now everybody's getting hyped up about a remedy that's not there, unfortunately.
Yeah, can we talk about that a little bit? I went into it and then I just stopped because I'm like, you know what? Wait for the lawyer. Don't take my freaking word for it. It doesn't exist. It's not my fault.
Yeah, I mean, we have our constitutional system for a reason, and people should think through whether they would really want this kind of remedy to suddenly come into play. If the who is likely to benefit from this over time, if somehow we were going to set aside elections like 6 months, a year, 2 years after the fact, they would have done it to Trump when he won in 2016. They would have said they would have found some pretext and removed him outside of impeachment. We have the limited remedy is impeachment. That's just for the presidential election. And then, from your political science days, if we could set aside laws based on fraud in the legislature, almost none of the laws would be considered to have passed. I mean, that's just reality.
That's the truth of it. Yeah.
So you can imagine, and this goes to our constitutional amendments. I mean, there are plenty of amateur grassroots historians who documented. I first dove into this in the 16th Amendment context because I had clients that are like, look, the 16th Amendment did not meet the constitutional standard to be added to the Constitution. And they had done massive research. Yeah, I mean, they'd gone through all and it turned out, of course, they were right in the sense that you had a bunch of legislatures that passed a different amendment than the 16th Amendment. You had legislators getting bribed. You had fake reports from the head of the legislature that something passed that didn't pass, which shouldn't surprise you. I mean, a new tax amendment was going to be widely popular. No, I don't think so. They had to get in that by hook or by crook. But for practical reasons, once the congressionally designated official makes the declaration that the Constitution has been amended, they don't want to go back and revisit that because of the expectations that vest in that. And so, because then you could set aside the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments on whether or not those were actually states at the time in the Civil Rights Amendments. I mean, were those the properly recognized governments of the Confederacy, given the context? So,
and Lincoln pulled a fraud, Robert. I mean, he totally lied to them, and he had kept those people outside the city so he could literally say, no, there was no delegation in D.C., to my knowledge. That's
just the nature. It's not a system that we can really basically you have a small window to challenge the election in the presidential context, same for the most part. You have a few more remedies in the House or Senate, but not for the most part. Nor do we want those. I mean, when they've historically been used, they've been used against outsiders. So like Adam Clayton Powell, whatever people think of him, was an outsider, and Congress tried to say, well, we're going to say you won by fraud, and not seat you and try to expel you. And the Supreme Court rightly came in and said, no, you don't. You have to follow the expulsion procedures, and that requires a 2/3 vote. And that's good, because otherwise, I mean, it's the Marjorie Taylor Greens they'll accuse of being fraud and throw them out of Congress. That's
it
who
will
the power
work in
will
their
be used
favor. It will work, folks. It will absolutely work in the Democratic Party's favor. Look at how everything we talk about the construct all the time. If this was to happen, and maybe there should be something. I'm not telling you about the wisdom of it. I'm simply telling you how it would happen. They would use it. Even in 16, I think this is what Republicans are upset about, Robert. You know, and I know, that if the Democrats had control of the state legislatures like Republicans did in 2020, if they did in 2016 when Trump shocked them and won, they would have used the remedy that you and I had been saying, which is that really this is up to the state legislature. They can choose to say this election is irreparably corrupted or irreparably stained, and we're going to send our own delegates. So we're going to pick.
Or just say that we can't say who won the election. I mean, I thought that was the easy, and throw it to Congress, and then
Congress,
under the Constitution, it goes to Congress, but to vote by state delegation in Congress, not by total numbers in the House. Yep. And of course, Trump had the edge there.
Yep.
And so that's the proper political remedy. The legal remedy is if there's to file an election contest in that time frame. Though, in my view, in the presidential context, this should all be, and I'm really in the senator's context in my view too, but definitely the presidential context, there should always be the state legislature. I think election contests should be heard by the state legislature. I think the state legislature should resolve them and adjudicate them. I don't think the court should really be involved, because they'll fail. They'll always be on the institutional side, and they'll never apply.
Should we ever vest that much power in a couple of men and women in black robes? I mean, folks, are you kidding me? They should be heard by people we elect that live in our communities with us. I mean, that is good government.
It's what our Constitution called for. It said state legislatures. It didn't say states pick the electors. It said state legislatures pick the electors. That was deliberate. That was intentional. It was meant to democratize the presidential process to the smallest level of voting representational power, which is your state house member. You don't get from obviously city and all that, but at a state or federal level, you don't get any closer to the people than your state house representative. Really, that's really true in New Hampshire. I always forget they have almost 500. Every neighborhood's basically got their own little representative, which that's great. That's
cool.
Great. Imagine if you could walk down the street and talk to your state rep. I mean, that I strongly
I got
favor.
spoiled in Gainesville. I could. Rick was always right there. I got spoiled, and poor guy. I mean, it wasn't great for him all the time because it was a blue area, and he was just a very popular guy. He was a Republican. He was well known in the community, so he was able to beat that tide back. Even though Alachua is red, but Gainesville is very blue. And he'd go with his family to a Gator game, Robert, and he got physically attacked. I mean, it was it's just crazy nonsense. But yeah, I asked for clarification on this. So let me see, and I'm sure maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. I mean, we all heard about the 74,000 and change with no clear record of being sent. There's others here. Just under 12,000, a little over 11,000, who did not exist on the voter rolls. But people are going to say, what? Yeah, hear me out. They didn't become a record until December 4th, okay? So what they're saying is they just didn't exist. 18,000 and change voted. Many of these have questionable voting histories too, which raises an alarm bell in my head. But 18,000 that they found plus that voted, but then were immediately removed from the rolls after the election.
Right. And something similar happened in Georgia.
And we saw some of that in Michigan. That's just in the subsample we did.
Yeah, that's what Secretary of State was busy doing, the Hillary Clinton delete. She was
hitting the delete buttons, man. So, and then in what we're seeing in Georgia, if you were to take what they're saying at face value, already just a little scratch of the surface brings Joe Biden's margin just under 2,000 votes. So that's a little scratch. And if you, of course, have to believe everything, of course, I want to see it myself, and I'm waiting for these reports to come out from Cyber Ninja so I can look at them myself if the legislature releases them, which I'm sure they will, right? I mean, so
yeah, actually, the Democrats sued to make sure everything is disclosed, which was fine by me. I mean, I think that the state Senate wanted to control what they couldn't release, but I think they should release everything, and they've now been court ordered to do so.
Good. Oh, good then. Because, yeah, that's garbage. You know, I mean, some of the stuff, though, I see on Twitter, man, it's like I feel bad for people. They can't consume information on their own, and they're like literally just regurgitating things that are just not true. Like, before I was just talking about Maricopa County, that entire tweet is bogus. Everything in that tweet is bogus. I remember, I watched it, I heard every word that came out. They did agree. At first, Maricopa County, that's number one. And number two, they're attacking Cyber Ninja only because that was their strategy from the beginning. They chose not to participate, not to give them credibility, so when these things came out, they could then say, see, these people aren't credible. They did this. It's a political strategy that they decided on before the results ever came out. They don't think Cyber Ninja is not professional. There's no such thing as a certified auditor. It's the biggest title makeup. They fabricated that overnight. Okay. Oh my God. Robert, were they supposed to run down to like the auditor certification office in Maricopa?
You know, I mean, maybe
where do they get that certification?
You know, maybe there should be an election auditor position.
I agree.
You know, that maybe that. I mean, theoretically, that should be something the Secretary of State does, but unfortunately, these Secretaries of State don't care to do so. Georgia promised to do so, and he didn't really do it. Arizona never wanted to do so. I mean, that's a Democratic. They took that office in 2018, and so consequently didn't see any consequence from it. But so there's enough questionable ballots way past the margin of victory in Arizona. Not really a surprise. Probably be the same true in Georgia. And this is not. And I think they said they're going to do a little bit more signature match checks down the road.
Yeah, that doesn't even get into that, folks. That doesn't even include the crux of Robert and I's argument.
Yes,
doesn't even include it. This was a records check, Robert.
This is just the failure to canvass and count the first time in a constitutionally correct manner, which all the states did, frankly. I mean, I don't know if... Well, I mean, Florida was pretty clean. There was almost no controversy this time either way in Florida. But outside of Florida, every place else had either a county or a state government official who did not do a meaningful canvass. I mean, famously in Philadelphia, they blocked people from watching the canvass. The whole point of... Those people don't know the canvass is prior to the count. So the canvass is supposed to be as part of and all these election procedures, recognized international standards are part of, OECD has it for its election observers. The election audit, the United States Election Assistance Commission, which was created after the last debacle in 2000, has a whole bunch of these provisions about how a canvass is supposed to occur. I was citing these extensively to the Georgia Secretary of State officials when I was down there. Yeah. And the canvass is making sure that before you count the ballots, that you have only lawful ballots to count. Yep, so that's where the signature match check is supposed to occur. And all of it, in order to be considered an ethical election process, professional canvassing, independent election observers are supposed to be present. Non-state officials, including OECD officials, depending on which, but that they actually requested to be present. They were excluded as well. This has been, buried. The OECD tried to bury it in, page 65 of their report, but it was right there. Oh, by the way, by international election standards, this U.S. presidential election didn't come close to sufficing because they didn't even allow our observers to be present. They didn't allow any partisan observers to be present during the entire canvass of the process. So you don't get, and the canvass goes to all of it. What does the ballot look like? Where does the ballot come from? What's the,
I challenge this one. I don't like this signature. Okay, let's all look and see. That's how it goes.
Before you open up and look at the ballots, before you go to the counting, and then the counting is supposed to also be done with independent observers, et cetera. And in fact, the United States Election Assistance Commission, as well as the Elections Blue Ribbon Commission, which was made up of mostly Democratic secretaries of state just 6 years ago, both agreed that all of this really should be videotaped and should be live public viewing. Like the Arizona audit, where it was live viewing. You could watch tons of it if you wanted. It was amazing, the media's attempts to demonize that.
Incredible, Robert. There they are on film, unlike all the other instances that people have raised objections to. Here they are on film.
We only got secret filming in Georgia, and look what that showed. Oh, everybody's fun. Bring out the ballots. Don't worry, nothing suspicious here. Yeah, we only waited for the party election observers to be gone. We hid them under the table. They're in these big black tubs, and we're counting them as fast as we can. When we told everybody we're not counting anymore, nothing suspicious here at all, according to our institutional narrators.
This really did remind me of the '09 Iranian election. I'm not even kidding. This is what the Iranian Green Movement, Ahmadinejad versus Mousavi, and it was, as the counts were rolling in, it looked like Ahmadinejad was in trouble in every province to include his own birthplace province, and he was in deep trouble. And out of nowhere, before the counting's even done, they just declare 65-35. Ahmadinejad has won a resounding victory. It was incredible. And look, according to reports, Ahmadinejad's own people had their own exits that showed he was in deep trouble. And it's just, that they just stopped the count. Right? And of course, what did the United States do? Why are they stopping the count? Why are they declaring a winner before the count is even finished? Why aren't people allowed to observe what is going on with the counting process? This is what it and the regime, their excuses, the things they said, sounds like Joe Biden, sounds like the New York Times, sounds like the Washington Post, sounds like, every social media outlet. It just fact checkers, you name it. Same damn language, Robert.
And for people out there that, a lot of people got annoyed when we pointed out that the remedy of putting Trump in is not available. The remedy of changing the Senate is not likely available. People got agitated and frustrated.
Yeah, they did.
And I understand that. But my point to them is that doesn't mean that these audits have no value. These audits have great value to figure out where the problems are so we can fix those legislatively and elsewhere. And some people are coming back and say, oh, it's the Democrats. They'll never obey the rules anyway. The only way in which you get anybody to obey the rules is you expose that rules were violated the first time so that you can change the enforcement mechanisms and change the rules themselves in ways that are more strict and clear. A lot of this was because there were no clear enforcement mechanisms put in place by Republican legislators. They were the ones who were asleep in 2020.
Totally asleep, despite our best efforts, Robert. Despite our best this is this as painful for you as it is for me? Because it's
frustrating to different degrees. It's good to see confirmation that our core assumptions and claims were correct. Had this been done when we requested it be done, not only in terms of election remedy in advance, of course, but also election remedy at the time after the elections, not 6 months later. But it's still better that it happened. What people are underappreciating is we're seeing audits that have, in some cases, never been done in the history of the country.
Yeah.
So, stealing elections ain't anything new. It's an old business. But, to give an example, Lyndon Baines Johnson, when he stole the Senate seat in Texas in 1948, that he said if he lost, he was going to be out of politics forever. There was nobody in the media or within any part of academia who even covered that. They didn't believe it was true at all until Robert Caro came along and discovered it. And he decided to print it. And, a whole bunch of people, the Doris Kearns Goodwins of the world were squealing because they had been busy covering up that stuff. And all it took for Caro was he just went and talked to people, including the one witness who was the main witness for LBJ, to say it didn't happen. And he goes, I got all this evidence over here. It looks like this did happen. Well, how do you explain your testimony? And it was an old Mexican American Democratic political figure. He goes, oh, that's simple, son. I lied.
Yeah. That's right.
No problem telling, right? So there's a long tradition. The only way to prevent it or try to prevent it is to create new rules, new enforcement mechanisms. And part of that has to be that there'll be an audit after every election. After any close, contested, consequential election.
Yeah, within a certain couple of points or something. Just like what triggers recounts, Robert. Something like that.
And we should really have just random audits, like we do everything else in society and government. The whole idea is the government loves to do this to people. They love this, the little OSHA people and those people. They love to come and give you a little sudden inspection. Okay, why can't we do a sudden inspection of the election processes whenever we as a people want it to happen? Because what we'll find is there is an extraordinary amount of some degree just incompetence, in some degree deliberate corruption of the system. And
in the case of Georgia, Robert, and some of the stuff that voter Georgia's claiming to find, that can't be incompetence because you're making up tallies.
Is corruption. I mean, there was always risks with machines. I, again, don't believe machines had much to do with this particular election outcome. But that doesn't mean I'm still thrilled to see people talk about, let's go back to old school. The way Canada still does it. The way England still mostly does it. Like their Brexit. Look at how Brexit was done. They brought in the ballots, clear, clean chain of custody, no computer, nothing. Everybody did it, old school ballots. They dumped them out on a worldwide TV you could watch. They dumped out the ballots, and they counted them right there for everybody to watch.
Yep.
It's like, that's how it should be done. There's no reason why a count can't be done fully transparent, full video cameras all the time.
Canada too. That's what they do.
Absolutely. If we can have body cameras for cops, we can have body cameras for election officials.
Oh, damn. Look, I mean, it's amazing that people haven't put so much more emphasis on this when we hyper focus on all of these other issues like that, like, cops, civil rights, right? But we don't take seriously how we decide the next president of our country. This is crazy.
Completely. I mean, it's one upside to the debacle of this election is that people are paying far more attention than they ever have in the history of the country, frankly, to how, maybe since Andrew Jackson had it stolen from in 1824, but that was old school, in the
that was old school kind of. That's what I was trying to allude to earlier. That was an old school kind of theft,
But it educated people about the need to empower the ballot box. And a lot of the peak of a large part of working class anywhere was between called the Jacksonian era, was the peak of working class prosperity almost anywhere in the world at that point, between 1828 and 1860. And so that's largely, and that was due to Jacksonian reforms that largely happened because of the steal of 1824. That's where a lot of good election law reforms are getting passed. They're getting upheld and affirmed by the courts, which is tremendous. And these audits are introducing people. Here's how the process is. So people are getting a level of education they never had before.
Yep.
People understand the difference between, why a ballot should have a crease or it shouldn't have a crease, depending on where it came from, as an example.
Why chain of custody matters. Why chain of custody matters. Stuff like that.
How is it some of these ballots don't have serial numbers on them?
Which is
the
another
whole point
thing.
of tracking the ballot was to have sequential numbering so that certain ways of fraud could not happen. And now they're finding ballots that got counted in the election, apparently, that don't have any numbering on them, so you can't track and trace the time and when it came in. That's the point of those ballots. It doesn't tie back to who voted. It only ties back to, okay, this is that ballot in that sequence of paper that we received from the printer on X date, and we gave it out at this precinct booth, and they voted at this time order. What it does is, if you have ballot number 273 show up in a ballot batch that's all in the 10,000s, something went wrong, and that's it's evidence that there are serious problems. So I think that what the auditors are doing are great. I think the core purpose of it is to expose what happened. The other thing is this: it's a huge boost for Trump. Yeah. If Trump wants to run in 2024, all the facts that get confirmed in the audits and the fact that there's no remedy now in the election just gives him great fuel for 2024. So just because they don't have the grand prize of Trump now, Republican Senate now, doesn't mean it doesn't have benefits. It has long-term institutional benefits in the reforms that occur legislatively and enforcement, long-term benefits in the public being much better educated about how our elections work and being much more observant and involved and concerned in the future, because that's one of the greatest checks. It's like if you have a little area of crime, it's the difference between having no cops and 100 cops. And that's what's happening is you now have 100 cops in this area. That's going to deter crime. It just is. It's going to deter election fraud. It's going to deter election misconduct and increase the capacity for confidence in elections, and ultimately helps Trump and those on that side of the aisle too. So even though it doesn't have the full remedy, it has a lot of remedies that I think are very worthwhile. So I think it's an excellent thing that's been done, and I think the audits are producing good outcomes, good results. And we'll see what the final results are from Arizona. And the other sign that you can see this is working is you have legislators in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all wanting to repeat what Arizona just did.
Yeah, that's good you brought that up. And the benefit, there is a lot of benefit. It's not just because there's no mechanism to undo it. There is a ton of benefit about what happens in the future, what happens right now, and then people, the willingness to get involved because people have realized that they incorrectly relied on certain officials to do their jobs with character and with competency. Now they're getting involved. And we're going to have a bunch of these candidates on. As a matter of fact, I'm having one on Inside the Numbers on Wednesday. We got to get Masters on, too, by the way, running in Arizona. This is bringing people, J.D. Vance in Ohio, probably never would have run. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Would you be honest? No. Would you agree?
And people discovering the importance of the Secretary of State's office. They're discovering the importance of the local election boards, positions they had paid no. It reminds me of the religious right awakening in the early 80s.
Yeah.
When they're like, oh, we need to start paying attention to school boards. We need to start paying attention to this and that and these other, being a Republican delegate. That's important. Yeah. All those things, that's how they changed the direction of the Republican Party. And they achieved partial success, didn't achieve full success, but they were about to get run over completely, and that did not happen. Homeschooling got great degrees of political and legal protection, which was probably the most important achievement. They may not have realized it, but probably the most important achievement at the time, because there was an effort afoot to shut down religious schools and homeschooling on the ground that it was racially discriminatory, which was ridiculous. But that's where the Jimmy Carter lefty admitted. That's how Jimmy Carter decided, I'm just going to watch all my evangelical voters go bye-bye. By letting these little lefties from Massachusetts
tell them what to do,
misunderstand. Yeah. Like they think, oh, well, in 1964 in Deep South Mississippi, they resegregated their schools by labeling them private and Christian. That doesn't mean every school that's ever labeled itself private and Christian has the same motivation. But they couldn't tell the difference because to them it was all the same. And that's why they had small little schools in Kansas that had a history of being on the abolitionist side, on the civil rights side, as an example. Were labeling them racist. And that's what led. That was a big part of the awakening of the evangelical political movement, the birth of the moral majority, and the religious right in a politically active way. Not long after that came Pat Robertson, which was, people always misunderstood. Robertson and Falwell were two different parts of the religious right. They were not the same. The left media just can't understand religious conservatives at all.
Because they would lump them together because they don't get them, Robert.
It's like they actually kind of hate each other. Well, particularly Baptists don't trust Pentecostals at all. They're like, you people are rolling around and doing some sort of tongue thing. I don't know. Totally. Well, I mean, I grew up as independent Baptist. And as independent Baptists, we knew all the other Baptists were going to hell too. Definitely the Southern Baptists. They were no. So I mean, people didn't understand the divisions within that. You had the Lutherans, which were their own thing, the Methodists, which were their own thing, the Charismatics, which were their own thing, Baptists, which were their own thing. So but what brought them together, I mean, aside from concern over the culture and abortion and normalizing things that they thought maybe that shouldn't be normalized just yet. And a lot of their warnings turned out true. They're like, look, if you normalize too quickly before the culture agrees with it, something like recognizing gay marriage, which a lot of Christian conservatives opposed, they said, watch, they won't stop there. Pretty soon they're going to say boys are girls and girls are boys. And, by golly, that's exactly what happened. My friends on the gay rights side said that's not going to happen. Well, here we are. That's where there did need to be some barriers, and what precedents we set needed to be established. Because the argument in between was gay marriage can be accepted once it becomes publicly accepted. But until then, no. And that was the position in between the religious conservatives and the gay rights movement. And their argument, that middle position argument, was this will create better barometers. It says, look, if a popular culture accepts it in a democracy, okay. But that's going to be the standard. Unless they do, well, we don't just start granting civil rights to it as if it's the same as race relations or gender relations or ancestry, because you'll open a door that normalizes anything. And that criticism turned out right. So so all of these election law reforms are great and fantastic to see and witness. And I think the audits are getting good results and will keep getting good results. And it's producing good results in so many different places: public education, public information, the candidates you're talking about who never would have run, the offices. I mean, how many people were asleep at the wheel about the Secretary of State? Most people I had no idea what it does. They're like, well, what is Secretary of State?
Shauna Bollock running in Arizona. That was a serious woman. Believe you me, folks. If Shauna Bollock wins, the Secretary of State's office in Arizona, this shenanigans are over.
Completely.
It's over.
What happened in Michigan never would have happened if they would have paid attention to the Secretary of State's office. In Arizona, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, it was Democrats stole the Secretary of State's office in 2018. I mean, they grabbed it, they won it, and largely I think stole because Republicans didn't really put a great effort onto it. Secretary of State was seen as one of those inconsequential offices. It's the guy that has excess money who wants to run on the Republican side. That's how the Georgia Secretary of State, Ratburger, got in. Nobody cared. And he had a bunch of money and be like, oh, I'd love to be a state official. And who is it that seeks that? What kind of Republican seeks that position? Someone who wants to be invited to all the cool parties in Buckhead.
Absolutely.
And the cool gatherings in DeKalb County and be celebrated at Emory University.
That's so true. He nailed it. That's it in a nutshell. That is exactly who runs. And it's the way it's been. The way it's been for years, that they have been, generally speaking, they've been rhinos, and if you want, for lack of a, what other term, these are your very textbook Republicans who, don't care about this stuff. And now you have somebody, and I believe Shauna's husband is
if it was a Bush,
State Supreme Court Justice.
For Bush, they would go to great lengths. I mean, they'd make sure people were identified as felons who weren't even identified as felons, like Jeb did for W back in 2000 in Florida.
Yeah, and she ruined her career for George W. Bush. Completely threw away her career. Catherine, what was her name? Catherine
Harris, right?
Yeah. That's it. And I mean, she was. I know they portray her in Hollywood as like an idiot in a lot of these movies. She was a little spacey, but she was thought of as the next governor of Florida until she took that gamble. And then the media demonized her for doing it, which is fascinating to see the same media say, oh, how dare they challenge and say bad things about the Arizona Secretary of State or about the poor Georgia Secretary of State. Go back and look at the media's coverage of Catherine Harris. It was vicious. It was, and they personally mocked her.
Personally, as a person. Live. Then they followed up with the movie. Then they followed. I mean, the degree of lack of self-awareness of Hollywood and the media is really striking. But it so limits
true.
their ability to. Nobody's going to believe that this audit is a bogus audit. They can keep saying that over and over again, but as soon as it was called an audit, Republicans had won. Conservatives or Trumpers or pro-audit people had won because it's the term audit. Every person knows what an audit is. And everybody also is accustomed to people who are guilty of fraud not liking audits. So, when the media keeps saying bogus audit, bad audit, terrible audit, they think it reinforces the public belief that there's something to hide.
Yep.
That the press wants to cover up. And that's what's being documented and demonstrated and substantiated. And this will also be evidence for all time. I mean, by the end of the day, especially if they add in Pennsylvania, if they do an audit too, and if Wisconsin does an audit, we already kind of know from Wisconsin because all those people who are suddenly indefinitely confined, who were clearly not indefinitely confined, voted way past the margin of victory, and Wisconsin courts have now acknowledged that shouldn't have happened. They just refused to do remedy during the time period.
They just don't want to do anything about it. Right. Yeah.
They also acknowledged in Michigan that the Secretary of State signature standards were bogus. So, which
I got smeared by PolitiFact.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I appreciate the judge's ruling, but it came like 2 months too late for me to defend myself.
The way this animal works. So at least it's better than nothing. The media will just focus on all the screw ups of Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell. It goes back. There was a time period where we would have had control. I was within 24 hours of being in charge of the election efforts for the president. And some of the people, and this transitions to another topic that Jen Ellis has been talking about, there was an effort. The Secretary of State of Georgia obviously didn't want me in charge. Well, they were mostly thrilled because Rudy decided to saddle up with Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell because Rudy had no clue money-wise. He had a clue money-wise. This was his last gasp of cash, but he had no clue election law-wise. He had no idea what he was doing.
No idea.
What I didn't know is that he'd been stealing our stuff all along. I mean, that's coming out in the new Trump books. That Rudy claimed he found out that Georgia's recount for all this other stuff. So I see why Trump had even more now. Why he had confidence in him. But had they not hijacked things, but the other big hurdle to me getting in was Ronna McDaniel and the RNC and that corrupt lawyer at the RNC who was one of the lawyers who was lying to the president about the recall rights in Georgia. I mean, the law was plain as day. And again, this is not an open debate question. There was a recount before the certification. So there's no doubt that, in fact, you can get a recount before the certification. So Justin, I forget his last name. I remember him talking to me on the phone. He was all panicky when he found out I was going to get involved. And he tried to derail me. And Ronna McDaniel was leading the effort. I mean, the Georgia party chairman went right to Ronna McDaniel and asked that I be retained. And she just delayed and delayed. And then what she did is Ronna McDaniel. Now, again, this is kind of on Trump. Why did you put a Romney anywhere in? Because her name isn't really McDaniel. It's Ronna Romney. That's real name.
She stopped that. That was a branding decision.
I mean, and then stole almost $250 million from the public in the name of elections. And I don't think penny one went to elections, to my knowledge, to anybody fighting the election fights. It was entirely redirected to other Republican pet causes. Indeed, like I said, the biggest hurdle in Georgia was the Trump victory team. Because also people don't understand, Trump delegated his entire political campaign infrastructure, put it under the control of the Republican National Committee. Yep. An incredibly bad decision that paid, of course, knowing Trump will do the exact same thing next time around. But his learning curve is on the slow end of the scale these days. But that's a grievance for another day. And again, just listen. Don't take my word for it. Just listen to Trump. Listen to Trump complain about why he picked a terrible Joint Chief of Staff in the Army and Milley.
That statement was great, though. That statement eviscerating Milley. That was honestly,
it was great. It was just a reminder of, please, Trump, somewhere along the line, figure out why you made these mistakes so you don't keep repeating them. For the love of the good Lord. I mean, he could do so.
If Obama hated him, if Obama couldn't stand Milley, right? Everybody couldn't stand, and all of your enemies are still telling you to keep this guy around. I mean, it's time to do some damn reflection. And Laura was mad on Saturday. Where the hell was he?
Yeah.
Where the hell was he? Robert, did you hear the allegations out of these? I went to Matt's rally on Saturday to free the political prisoners. They were reading the letters, family members, whatever. They're alleging nightly beatings. I'm talking about mental and physical abuse. Then nightly, they swing their doors open and mace them and laugh and close the door. The District of Columbia's corrections officers, starvation. They won't give them discovery, Robert. They won't let them talk to their counsel. This is their corruption. It's an abuse is widely known.
Now, what people don't realize is in political cases, this is kind of the norm. You have to fight like mad to game the situation more in your favor. But I mean, he was also not been present to lobby for any of these legislative reforms.
None of them.
I mean,
not Texas, not Georgia, nothing.
It's a sign of the great limitations on him. I mean, basically he will always be a marketer for populism writ large. In the persona of himself, anybody that expects anything more of him is expecting too much. He'll never go past that.
But
so
you are right. If all these comes out, you are right about he's got an argument, man, in 3 years.
All this helps him, and he is paying attention to this. Now he could have done more to promote it, frankly, at the beginning, which he only kind of sporadically did. But and it's important to hold Trump's feet to the fire because it needs to remind everybody that to quit relying entirely on Trump.
Yeah,
is my conclusion because the deferring to Trump, waiting on Trump, delaying for Trump, none of that's going to get anywhere. I mean, you can tell he's still obsessed more with his win record than endorsing good populists because that's what he's like. I got 99.5%.
Yeah.
And it's like
350 to
when
2.
you wait to endorse someone until everybody knows they're going to win, nobody cares about your endorsement then, Trump. It's useless. The way I would picture Trump is this would be like people who waited until it was clear you were going to win the Republican nomination after, say, all the Northeastern primaries had voted. And then they endorsed you. And then you thanking them and saying, man, that endorsement of them really their endorsement of me really put me over the top. He wouldn't have any respect for that person. He only respected people who endorsed him when it was risky to endorse him. Now, even then, he bailed on almost all of them. Good, Trump, I mean, like people have been critical of Cernovich for his criticism of Trump over the years is because Trump showed the least loyalty of almost any to people. Great loyalty to his voters, but lousy loyalty to individuals. I mean, that was across the board. I mean, you look at I mean, Chris Christie endorsed him early, tossed him out pretty quickly. Rudy Giuliani fought for him early, never really gave him anything in terms of the cabinet.
And that was a
position.
critical mistake to choose Team Sessions over Team Christie, which was an early fight, guys. For those who don't know it,
And to
critical
know,
mistake.
like Sessions, give him Secretary of State. He would have made a fantastic Secretary of State. Now, I put that a little bit on Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. They should have known that Sessions. This is where they were naive and had blind spots.
Too
themselves.
freaking nice, Robert.
He believed in the Justice Department. He believed in ways that was not going to be helpful. Like, look at what made Sessions useful or a Trumpist. It was not his positions on the Department of Justice, because there he wants to run after all the potheads. You know, instead, it was his positions on trade and on war. And where better place to put him in? Make him Secretary of State. That, frankly, is more high, in my view, more high profile than Attorney General. You don't just defer to what he wants. And it wasn't even clear that that was his actual priority necessarily. But, you know, that there's debates about what happened there. But part of it was he had, you know, a complete hodgepodge of people in terms of his transition. But even since then, I mean, once he tossed Flynn aside, it meant you couldn't trust Trump to have your back. I mean, that's just reality. I mean, I used to tell people, if I want to get Trump's loyalty, just go up and slap him in the face, and then sooner or later he'll drop to his knees and beg for your approval, because that's what he did to people who screwed him over throughout the campaign. Like, it was a shock to the Cernovich type people to see people who waged war against Trump throughout the campaign get prime gigs afterwards.
Yeah,
it was like, what the heck? While people who went to war for Trump mostly couldn't even get an interview, and I was like, wow, there's something.
You know this. He
seriously
wants
confusing.
to be liked, man. This is, you know this. He has that Nixon. It is a. I don't want to call it a flaw. It's something else. It's like,
well, it's a virtue.
It's a weakness. It's a weakness.
The same trait that's a virtue and a vice.
Yeah,
that kind of that ego that leads to him wanting approval from people who dislike him is an ego that also leads him to be unafraid or of the entire system. So his stubbornness, the same stubbornness that right now won't lead him to second guess himself about his own admitted bad personnel decisions, is the same becomes a virtue when it deals with him sticking to his voters, despite whatever the New York Times or the Washington establishment wants. So that's why I say it's got to the point where it's
obsession. The tendency to obsess, about, I guess, to,
Oh, I mean, the Pat Buchanan, people go back and watch read the Pat Buchanan book about the early Nixon administration, there's a reason he published it when he did. He published it right around the time of Trump, because the goal was, this is probably what's going to happen with Trump. And it is. I mean, it was the same obsession with the New York Times, obsession with the mainstream media, obsession with likability in certain circles, or not. Obsessed with certain people's opinions of them, and a self-confidence that sometimes could get misdirected. But Buchanan's point was always personnel is policy, and don't worry about the institutional press. Worry about your audience. And Nixon made that mistake twice, and it's what led him astray ultimately. And the same was true in part for Trump. Not as egregious as Nixon, but some of the same errors, but it's errors he's not. That's just not his skill set. And now on the flip side, those people who are totally dismissive of Trump are ignoring the reality. Trump has the biggest base by far. Trump is the best campaigner by far. Trump has the best persuasion skill set by far. And Trump kept his word to his voters. He didn't do so good in certain places, but Trump never betrayed his audience. It would have been easy for him to have been very popular within Washington if he would have betrayed his voters on war and trade, and he never did on either. And so and that's DeSantis might measure up. Open question on a lot of trade issues, particularly, but also some war issues. Though DeSantis is doing the best of figuring out, okay, this is where Trump was strong, and just replicating it. He's not trying to compete with it. He's not trying to conflict with it.
I got a super chat I want to ask you about before I forget. It's unrelated, and we should probably pivot to some of the other things we got to talk about soon if you want. What you sent me.
Yeah, because you got Cuba, South Africa.
Yeah, we're burning. Yeah, I just want to ask you this because this is a listener, and she's got I mean, it's a quality of life question. It's a legal one. I'm a Kentucky nurse that's going to be fired by Trilogy Health Services for not signing a pledge to take a jab when the FDA approved, which is really emergency use authorization. It's not real approval. I'm not going to get into that.
It sounds like her hospital may be saying that once it becomes FDA approved, they want nurses.
Okay. She must take it.
So once it's past emergency use authorization, that's what you're thinking too? Once it's beyond
it sounds
EUA?
like what she's saying. If she said FDA, there's a bunch of employers that are waiting for FDA approval before they mandate it.
So do you have any advice for her to keep her job? This needs to be like a more class action thing or individual.
I mean, there was an unfortunate decision, I think, from a Trump judge on Indiana University who went back to citing Jacobson today.
Freaking Federalist. To
say, oh, it's just fine. These you can mandate any vaccine you want, regardless of the evidence that supports it, if you have any reasonable basis to think it might be okay. I mean, that's where half of Trump's judges are bad, half of them are good, depending on where you're at, basically. At least on certain populist issues. So they'll all be happy now. They'll all be happy to be pro corporation. That you can rely on. Wherever Mitch McConnell aligns. What they really should do is, rather than do which judges are voting with which judges, they should look at how many of the judges' results correspond with Mitch McConnell's positions.
Yeah. And
you'll find it'll be about a 90% ratio, whereas with Trump it'd be about a 50% ratio. And it shows who really picked the Supreme Court. And that's the other reason why I always recommend tweaking Trump on some things. He pays attention to criticism. It's frankly sometimes the only thing he pays attention to.
Yeah, we would have gotten red flag laws if it was any other Republican president. After the shooting, we would have gotten red flag laws if it wasn't Donald.
And that's
Trump.
What these vaccine mandates are. They're a different version of red flag.
They are.
That's the goal. See, it's scary, and they're trying to have the lowest possible legal standard. Just to make it reasonable, rather than necessary, compelling, et cetera, all that high language that comes with strict scrutiny. So, but I think for in the employer, if it's a state hospital, there may be a suit against the state. If there's if it's a private employer, there may be claims under the Americans with Disabilities Act, maybe claims under HIPAA, depending on the circumstances. But particularly, I think the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're also, because of Bobby Kennedy's suit in D.C., he alerted me to the fact that some of these may violate religious rights. So, for example, I have a potential client of a claim against a university, Bard, where the client, the reason why they're a student, the reason why they won't take the vaccine is because their understanding is the vaccine used stem cell research. And for religious reasons, opposes stem cell research. So won't participate in anything that used stem cell research. That, to me, is a religious objection at core. And under the religious, I forget, it's always this long thing, Religious Restoration Act of 2000, Bobby Kennedy says that these mandates violate that law under certain circumstances. So I think that might also be a claim for some of these people. So over the next several weeks, I'll be bringing some suits against mandatory vaccines, against coerced vaccines. Now, the legal claims are stronger when it's an emergency use authorization status because of the Nuremberg Code provision in federal statutes. But that doesn't. But in either circumstance, there are usually ADA claims available. There are usually because the core problem all of these employers have is they don't realize they don't have the evidentiary substantiation for their claim. So it's like discriminate. Like let's say tomorrow, everybody announced, okay, anybody in wheelchairs, they're dangerous to the public, and you can't hire them, right? Well, the ADA law was designed to say, well, that doesn't matter. You have to have specific, substantial proof that person in a wheelchair cannot perform any employment task, even with reasonable accommodation. And I don't see how the employers are going to show that, because getting the vaccine, particularly when they ask for people that have already had COVID to get the vaccine,
right?
That they're more immune with COVID, having got COVID, than they are, according to recent studies, than they are from the vaccine. Adds nothing at all. Yep. So that makes no sense. And then if you deal otherwise, this again is just pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic risk. The media is doing a good job, sort of gaslighting people on this, sort of snowing people over on this, because They're acting like, I mean, look, if you get COVID and you know it, there's other remedies independent of the vaccine, which is isolation. So the self-isolation.
Supposedly, right? Isn't that what we were told the whole time?
So getting vaccinated doesn't do anything to deal with that risk. It only deals with the person who gets COVID but doesn't know they have COVID. And that's the pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic person. But the probability that person spreads it is already tiny because their viral load is so low. Yeah. And number one. Number two, and they only have it for a couple of days, and only a small percentage of people that can happen to. So that's part one. Part two is, and by the way, you could make an argument that vaccinated people spread the COVID at the same rate as unvaccinated, pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic people. And we're seeing lots of more evidence for it.
I was just going to say that.
Apparently in the UK that have COVID vaccinated. And we have a
Israel too.
Our best version of that, those Texas Democrats. It turns out they're super spreaders of more things than just stupidity. So they hopped on that plane, flew in, and now it's spreading everywhere. And they were all vaccinated. So, I mean, this is a unique vaccine. It's the vaccine that somehow doesn't actually vaccinate you. So, to me, it's just a drug. We should just call it what it is. It's a drug. It's a drug that may reduce the harmful health consequences if you get COVID. But there's not a lot of evidence that there's any different spread transmission rate between them and people that are pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic in the first place. And that means there's no benefit at all from a spread perspective of the vaccine. And so all I got to do is I got to find a judge. That's what I'm going to sue in as many places as possible. So like a half dozen places. Hopefully find a judge that has a brain, an IQ, and a conscience. And that's what I always say about judges.
Good luck, man.
I'm not looking for good, smart judges. I'm just looking for judges that are either good or smart. I'll take one of the two because sometimes getting either is a mini miracle.
You think religious objections would be a stronger argument if it did get to the Supreme Court? They do seem to be a court that would at least be, or the new Roberts Court, would at least be.
I think religious. I think we're going to pursue it all. Religious, because if you play out the consequences,
shotgun approach.
Exactly, you play out the consequences under the ADA. Like the way I've been comparing this to people is like, there was a prior discussion of requiring certain disclosure of medical conditions as a condition of employment. It happened about 30 years ago. People were debating it. It was called If You Had AIDS. Yep. They made movies like Philadelphia condemning the effort of employers to try to get into that information. And now here we are again. And do people think we'll never go back there if this precedent is set? If you can require the disclose, like when I'm in a colloquial conversation saying, this isn't something you should ask an employee to have, and the person says, why not? Well, what would be the problem with that? And I was like, okay, how about the next time before you go to Walmart, they ask you which STDs you or your partner has? Would you feel comfortable broadcasting that over the PA system there? Because that's what this is. It's no different. It's getting into your private medical condition and asking it be disclosed to the whole world. That's exactly what the ADA says you cannot do if you're an employer or a place of public accommodation. So that's where I'm going to bring all the suits. ADA, HIPAA where it applies. HIPAA doesn't apply to the employer context unless the employer discloses it to a third party. But it appears, by the way, that's what's happening. In that criminal case they brought against that alternative health person who was doing their own vaccine cards, and they disclose that there's a database. There's a reason that knocking on the door stuff they're talking about. When I suspected that they have a database of who's vaccinated and who's not. They do. The government is requiring everybody to send. They're doing it under the guise of making sure the identity card is an authentic identity card. Isn't that genius? Little sneaky little.
You got to give them credit, Robert. They really put some thought to this crap. They really do. When they can't get things at the ballot box, when people won't fall for the dupe, on certain, they'll just find another way to do it. They're making the conspiracy theorists.
They're all right.
The
only mistake Alex Jones made was he understated it.
I hate that term. That's a CIA created term. I hate that. Just for everybody who doesn't know that. Conspiracy theory is quite literally a CIA created term used to shut down debate. That
well,
is
and
what,
in particular, shut down discussion about people in power.
yeah.
Because they don't. Because the most common word used in torts and in criminal cases in the United States is conspiracy. It's the most common allegation brought. So it's not like people really have a problem in positions of power using conspiracies. They just don't think any conspiracy should be alleged against them. And that's why every time they say conspiracy theory, it's when the ordinary person says somebody in power is doing something bad. Oh, no, that can't be true. That's a conspiracy theory. When you're doing it as an ordinary person, then it's a legitimate conspiracy, of course.
Tell her we'll get in touch with her because it's 3:20. Tell her, because she's saying she has until August before she's fired.
Usually she could. The first thing is just to ask for a. Is it required I disclose this? My understanding is is that this would be private, confidential information. But what you'll find is they're mostly tricking employees into signing things. Because you dig into the small print, the human resource officer doesn't really want to run the gamble of the legal complications.
So if you push it, then they really start to make
you can say, look, I may in fact choose to get vaccinated, but my understanding is that my medical information is private and not something my employer can request. Can you please explain? Something real basic like that. Stay gentle and generous. Don't admit you're not getting the vaccine. Just say, I may in fact already be vaccinated, but my understanding is my medical information is always private. So what's this about? And you'll watch human resource. A bunch of these people, the employers are changing their position. The human resources gives an explanation, or they start doing all kinds of twists and turns. And so that's a possible approach. The other thing is that helps additionally, you may have additional legal claims. Some people said, oh, well, what happens if they punish me because I raised the question? Well, then you might have a whistleblower claim or a public policy claim. Because the discrimination may be on that basis. So I think that that's something they can do. And I'll have more stuff up.
Tell her to stay in touch. Yeah, tell her to stay in touch so we could follow what's going on with her and because this is crap, Robert. I know somebody else who's getting it because he's like, look, I'm just not comfortable with mRNA. He actually has some other issues. It's a perfectly valid reason. He's not an anti-vaxxer. He was going to get the Johnson & Johnson until they slapped a warning on it and the state took it down. So, I mean, that was what he said. Look, I just want a traditional antigen vaccine. I don't want it, which, well, I'm not going to get into the words, on YouTube, but that was not good enough, and he's in a fight too. So, I mean, this is just crazy. But look, I think, and a good way to segue is that you can't push people, you can't suppress thought, slap conspiracy theory titles on it to try to suppress it. You can't ignore people's legitimate grievances, right? I mean, things just break, man. They just break. If you don't vent grievances, if you don't air them out, address them, which is what the importance of a republic is. It really is. That was what they were trying to do, man. They were trying to create a system that did address grievances, So basically, because they understood, looking at history, this is how things collapse, right? And look at what is going on, which is what I said in the beginning. Like, a common thread here, Robert, is like systems that probably were never stable or real to begin with, now just collapsing. Look at South Africa. You want to start with South Africa?
Well, I'll say it's really around the world because you're seeing mass So even if some of these positions have majority support in different countries around the world, the intensity is all on the opposed to these provisions. And that's where, if you understand politics, it's like people didn't understand, say, gun control. You could get, say, 60% of the country to be in favor of some gun control position. But that's because large numbers of people simply don't care one way or the other. And they're like, okay, sure, why not?
Why not?
The people who care about it, on the other hand, are in that 40% that are opposed. That 40% that are opposed, they're going to vote on that issue. Whereas the 60% that are for, very few of them are going to vote on that issue. And this is understanding where intensity matters as much, or usually matters a lot more, than majority. You want the intense position on your side, the intense supporters on your side, the passionate supporters on your side, more so than you care about the majority. The majority is secondarily, because normally you'll get to the majority through the intensity.
You'll make it a majority, right?
Yeah. But also just aggregating the votes. In other words, you could have 60% disagree with you on, say, a bunch of positions, but if it's not the position that's going to govern their vote, it doesn't matter. What you care about is the decision that's going to govern their vote. Add that up to 50% plus one amongst different issues. And so you're seeing in France, 60% may be okay with Macron's vaccine mandates, but the 40% that are opposed are intensely opposed. And if there's anything with the legacy of France, it's they'll do public strikes, they'll do mass disturbances, they'll take over streets, they'll topple milk trucks, and all the rest. I mean, they'll stop transport, they'll stop subways, they'll stop trains. I mean, they know how to exercise a long labor union history in France. So they know how to organize and effectively act. And so you don't have to be part of a labor union to do so. But they've used labor union tactics throughout their last 100 years. And so to me, Macron doubling down on a vaccine mandate means maybe even he knows he's DOA. They're going to now. Le Pen is not likely to replace him. I think the elite has already picked a neoconservative type to replace Macron, somebody who's more on the right, who's more moderate. But Macron's decision to force a vaccine is in my view, suicidal politically. I think it's the last straw that's going to make him persona non grata for the upcoming presidential elections in France. And we're seeing different aspects of that throughout Europe. The other aspect that's all this common denominator is what South Africa and Cuba have in common is they're both countries whose economy could not afford a lockdown. They just could not do a lockdown. And yet, because the statists were such supporters, both on the left and the right, the people who believe in state control of your population for the population's well-being, on which Boris Johnson's of the same mindset, just on the right. Those people made a fatal political mistake when they governed societies that were already right on the edge. And so to take South Africa, I mean, a couple of things with South Africa. One is, Mandela still gets criticism, but I think it's unfair because of what he inherited. So, what people forget about the South African regime is it maintained its power under the guise that it was anti-communist. And so it came into being in 1948 that the then existing South African government created apartheid, was able to survive because it was the peak of the Cold War from 1948 to 1989. But to give an idea of how bad the South African government, it was really a rogue government from the get-go. Now, in some ways, it might have had positive economic aspects, like it was a protectionist economy. It was a very protectionist of a domestic manufacturing base and domestic food, agricultural base, et cetera. And that may have been a mistake of Mandela to move away from that protectionism, but that was a lot
of mistakes. He did. Yeah, he did.
Yeah, it was a real. South Africa. People forget South Africa was really the leading nation in arms trade, in illegal arms trade. One of the leading nation for mercenaries and private armies. Retiring to South Africa. A lot of little Nazis running around in South Africa. It was that kind of governing regime. So it was its own kind of crony, quasi-capitalist with some mercantilist elements that might have actually been, like you said, good. But the problem was deeply corrupt. The money laundering was off the charts. Arms trade was off the charts. When the government shifted, for example, even before then, the easiest place to get a second passport that was not through normal channels, South Africa. You paid a certain amount of money, you got a South African passport. Those
that mercenary thing's totally true too.
I have personal professional knowledge of that process. So it was deeply, deeply institutionally corrupt. The local government they created like a political machine. Functionally, they created a very repressive police state because so much of their labor supply came from the various black populations that didn't have any civil rights or civil liberties. They kept them uneducated. They kept education at a very low rate as a control mechanism. And then by the late 80s, you had the combination of the external sanctions plus just internal problems. They borrowed massive, massive amounts of money. Debt was off the charts. Inflation became a problem. Murder rates spiked. And at the time Mandela took over, the common belief was that it was just a few years before they would be in a all-out racial civil war. Because you have all these overlapping groups. You have Cape Town, which is its own thing. You got the Dutch the old Dutch who are running things. You got different African tribes, who some have had historical hostility.
Don't get along with each other.
Yeah, they go back centuries. The Bantu are very, very aggressive. Other tribes there, the original tribes of South Africa were nomadic and non-aggressive. And it's a country that sits on very rich resources. Like the number one way to know, I always tell people, if you think internal tribal conflict is the main driving factor in Africa, I just have one thing for you. If you look at, tell me what natural resources that are in world demand a country has, and I'll tell you exactly how much violence it has. Because countries that don't have major natural resources, even when they have some of the same conflicting tribes, don't have anywhere near the level of violence. And the reason is simple. There's no profit to the violence in those countries. Yeah. In the countries where there's natural resources, there's profit to the tribal violence.
So it's like, hey, that's a good
our
thesis,
tribe gets a hold of this mine or gets a hold of those diamonds or gets a hold of that uranium. So that's why it's not, Nigeria and parts of those countries are ripped apart. Whereas like Botswana, totally cool, totally no problem.
No blood diamonds here.
That's exactly why. I mean, if you want to be blessed in Africa, have no natural resources.
Robert, that's what they call them. Blood diamonds.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
what they are. And U2 song Silver and Gold about South Africa, which has a great line in it. Outside I'm a prisoner, but inside I'm free. Using the idea that the mind controls your own narrative. But what Mandela inherited is a country on the verge of civil war, with ridiculous amounts of global debt, with an inflating currency, with a dying domestic economy. And a black population that was terribly poor, low levels of education, low levels of basic housing and sanitation, and ripped with violence, in part because of his own wife. Winnie Mandela had unleashed leveraging violence to get more control, including
she was a freaking terrorist. Like she was a terrorist, Robert. Let's get real. She believed in weaponizing violence for politicized means, which, depending on your view, is either of terrorism.
Yeah, well, it's either terrorism or freedom fighting in other categories.
It depends who wins, right?
Absolutely, who wins. Exactly. But no question, it was terroristic methods because it was used on her own voter base, own population. But she saw it as necessary. She was a controversial character. There were people. She wasn't like a pure fascist, angry person because she had a strong political base too. She was more like a mobster who used I would call it more gangsterism.
Gangster. That's probably
politicized violence to achieve political control, but she mostly protected her actual core constituency. So that's why she had a big. If Nelson Mandela hadn't been there, she would have been the leading candidate for president. That gives an idea for 1990 South Africa. So it's the complexities of the situation. Plus, you also have a populace that's Bantu had long used violence. Different Bantu tribes had long used violence to achieve, and they had brutal, vicious violence. But then you put on top of that colonial violence and all the different wars with the British and the Dutch and the Boer Wars and all the rest there. Then you put on top of that some of the most vicious, ruthless police state techniques you can use, and you have a population that's been taught for centuries, but reinforced again and again within recent years, that ruthless, vicious violence is the ticket to power. And it's not like they're going to suddenly forget that overnight. But what Mandela inherited should have completely collapsed. Not only that, here's the other problem. He himself used to be a communist. He had shifted to a more pragmatic position by the late 80s, early 90s. He stayed living in his prison. I mean, they put him in a home, so that gives an idea for his mindset was different. He would always say, "I'm free in my mind, so it doesn't matter where they put my body." And so his imprisoning him actually led to his moderation, kind of like a Malcolm X late 1960s experience where he broke away from racialized Islam. And so Mandela comes in inheriting a debacle. Plus, he's got hardcore parts of the ANC that are still communist and hard left.
Yeah, they couldn't stand the trade he was going after, Robert. They were like, what the, he's like, we need economic activity. We need relationships. They hated him for it.
Yes, and to this day, they accuse him of adopting neoliberalism. And I think that's mostly an unfair criticism if you studied what he did. Because I had been interested in Mandela since I was a kid, so I studied everything that happened.
He wasn't a freaking Bush free trader.
Oh, no.
He was more selective.
No. Here's number one. My view is neoliberalism is when you let the World Bank and the IMF run your country. Yeah. He refused to take a penny from the World Bank or the IMF while still paying down the prior government's existing debt. And still, this was the big shocker, he kept inflation under control. He looked at economics. It's fascinating. Nelson Mandela is actually a Milton Friedman fan or supporter indirectly. He wouldn't say so, but his government decided to focus on stabilization, number one, preventing civil war and collapse as part of that, and then number two, keeping inflation manageable.
Some of that overlaps. I mean,
they had
really.
studied and concluded that high inflation was the biggest risk to being able to sustain it. And so in that sense, he rejected all the hard left. He didn't nationalize anything. He didn't go out and nationalize all the mines, nationalize all the railroads, nationalize all the natural resources. And that was where they were really enraged. They really wanted that to happen. He focused on stable, and astoundingly, it worked. I mean, under Mandela, and the few years right after Mandela, where Mandela's policy was still having effect, he doubled the number of people who had quality education. He shrunk poverty in half. He reduced the murder rate in half. I mean, he achieved things that are just mind-blowing levels of achievement, especially in the political circumstances he inherited, where his own base, his own wife, thinks maybe he should get Nicholas because she doesn't like what he's doing. You talk about a wife being pissed at you. I mean, that's a different dynamic. And he's got an ANC.
Turn Robespierre on you.
All his old hard left allies are enraged at him for not nationalizing and not adopting any of the hard left policies. And he's got a hard right that still hates him, that sees him as the demon and the evil thing, wanting to wage a civil war to restore their power and authority.
Usurper. Yeah.
And he's got these bankers just eager to come in and grab whatever they could that he's trying to keep at bay, but yet keep access to capital at the same time for a country that had almost none. But keep his core promises to his core audience, which is I'm going to radically reduce poverty. I'm going to radically improve education. I'm going to radically improve housing. I'm going to radically improve sanitation. I'm going to radically improve life expectancy. I'm going to radically reduce crime. And he did all of that. So, I mean, it was really, but because the hard left, the hard right, the right always, particularly the hard right, always hated him, and the hard left felt betrayed by him, he got almost no supporters in the scholastic world because they all had reasons of grievance. The right didn't give up their dislike of him because of his communist days and the ANC's communism, and the left didn't give up the fact that he didn't go through with that communism. Now, the problem was once he was gone from the scene politically.
That's what I was going to say. But afterward, take him into what happened. I mean, it all just...
Because the ANC basically, it became a crony capitalist system, a machine government-driven system. And this is the oldest African story ever.
The vultures, man.
As almost any resource-rich country, massive pressure was brought on them, and it was very easy to internally corrupt them because of the resources. The resources create this incentive for world governments around the world to be interested in how those resources are managed, and they also provide the easiest means to corrupt and enrich a small group of people who will help people on the outside steal as much as possible. And so that combination was built into the script of South Africa, like every other resource-rich African nation. But the only person who could keep it at bay was Mandela himself due to his unique popular appeal. Once he was gone from the political scene, it was going to take a downward path. And by 2010, when the new president came in 2009, from 2010 forward, the economy quit growing, started stagnating. They adopted, and this is where, it shows how much woke statist politics is in bed with corporate elites. Because J.D. Vance gave a great speech at Claremont about how it's time to wage political war against woke capital. And he made a point, he goes, I hear a lot of people on the right say that, hey, we shouldn't use the same tools the left does. And he goes, well, folks, they're using real bullets and real missiles. And our answer can't be, hey, here's some roses and flowers. Our answer has to be with bullets and missiles. But this shows it. South Africa was an early experiment in sort of critical race theory, which was, okay, we'll satiate the population that we're now going to underserve. Their economy is going to quit growing. Their educational benefits are going to quit growing. Their healthcare is going to quit growing. Their expansion of sanitation and healthcare, particularly in rural areas, is going to quit growing. Figuring out what to do with the farmland is going to quit. We're going to come up with a critical race theory way to deal with this. And so all of it became blame race. So don't blame foreign and corrupt domestic elites, go working with foreign corrupt elites to steal your country's resources for their personal profit at the expense of the broader populace. No, that's not what's going on. it's the white guy down the street that's the problem.
Total
it's the white
opposite of
farmer that's the
Mandela
problem.
too, Robert, right? Look, say what you will about Mandela for those who don't like him, but that's the total opposite of what Mandela
Mandela's
wanted.
whole thing was racial reconciliation. We are one nation. We are South Africa. That's why there's a great movie with Matt Damon.
It
about
is
the
a great
reason why
movie. Invictus.
Mandela elevated the rugby team, which was predominantly white, was this idea that,
Nationalism.
exactly. I mean, the
Yeah.
only thing I criticize or second guess Mandela on is I think mercantilism would have made sense for them
Me
in
too.
part because their domestic industry could not survive allowing in exports. However,
And isn't that how those vultures get their hooks in, Robert? Right?
Well,
So
the problem he had is he needed access to capital to pay off the global debt that his prior government had inherited, and they required access to to scrapping the mercantilist economy and their imports being allowed in as a precondition to get access to cheap capital sufficient to pay the interest off of that debt. And so I get why he did what he did. I don't know if he had a really practical another choice, but I think I told at the time the internal debate, I thought they underestimated the value of a mercantilist economy. But that's true of economics in general. And this is because the communists never valued a mercantilist economy either, because they say, everything's global and it's all about working class and all that jazz. It's about statism in the name of the word. It's always in the name of the
always in the name.
the working class are never actually getting the actual power. Some pigs are more equal than others, as Animal Farm Orwell says. But so then the economy has stagnated since 2010. They turned to basically a form of critical race theory to say, what the problem is? That white guy with a farm, that's the problem. The white guy down the street, that's the problem. The white guy with a business, that's the problem. The white guy has your home. Well, he doesn't have your home because there's not enough homes for that many people to fit into that one home. But again, it's because they shifted away from what Mandela was doing, which was broad expansion of the number of homes, broad expansion of sanitation, broad expansion of public education. And that had a great impact on both reducing poverty and crime. I mean, again, murder rate cut in half, in 5 years. I mean, that's an impressive achievement. But of course, what happens when they went back to critical race theory? It led to, we're back to the civil war that was burgeoning before Mandela came in. And all of a sudden we got race wars popping up all over the place. And the hard right says, see, we never should have given the local population power. The hard left says, or we got to go back to communism and statism. That's why we're even in the position we're in. Or saying, and the critical race theory was a convenient pretext to cover for their own corruption. And so now you build that up. You have 10 years of mediocrity in the economy, a misdirected sense of culprits, and then you lock down the country when you can't afford to do that for a year, and you get what you get right now in South Africa. Because you can't starve out a population, and that's effectively what lockdowns did, and not in a economy and a society that's right on the edge, teetering right on the edge, and not expect it to just collapse. And that's what's happening. It's just collapsed. And they don't have enough police force. So much money's been misdirected. They just replicate the ANC beginning
corruption trial going on in the middle of all of it. I mean,
because the president. I mean, here's a classic example. People should look deep into that corruption. The corruption is not just like there tends to be a focus of the right on the ANC is corrupt, which is true, but it misses the specific corruption of this president. It was him going into bed with an Indian family that became a billionaire thanks to their corruption. And that's why I say it's a foreign elite, corrupt domestic elite combination. Those who want to only blame the ideology of the ANC for this corruption are not looking at the broader picture of the history of Africa or of what happened here in South Africa.
Pieta de Merit, if I'm going to say this right, Pieta Maritzburg, a city in pieces. That's the column in all Africa right now. I mean,
and there's going to be a bunch of it. I mean, I thought it only told part of the story, but Lauren Southern's Farmlands does a good job of showing it from the sort of white South African perspective.
That's right.
Now,
Missed, I forgot about that.
It missed it, like the way it's kind of skipped over the apartheid period. I mean, God bless her, but it could have had a little bit more balance. But it's good. But I always the way I'd say is you can find plenty of left perspectives from the Black South African perspective. So it's the other perspective. Combine the two, and you get closer to the truth. But But South Africa's it's a non-func. It is now no different than almost any other post-colonial African state, where you have a domestic corrupted elite working at the behest and behalf of a foreign elite. And it's not a surprise. Mandela just delayed it and postponed its occurrence, but wasn't able to institutionalize the changes to a degree. And frankly, it's hard to point out a single African resource-rich country that has. It's just too tempting. I mean, you have this big resource. Yeah. You can get fabulously rich on it if you help foreigners come in and steal it at bottom dollar.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do it?
It's
that's
very
the problem.
tempting. And Robert, it's just a total difference. CRT, just total difference. Mandela wants, it's the reverse mentality of what Mandela was trying to install.
And proves its failure. Even for the left. The left should look at South Africa. CRT doesn't work, folks. It was always bogus. It was always you can achieve power with it, but you can't achieve outcomes with it. It will backfire, like is what's happening in South Africa. And the other thing is, all these lefties, some of their favorite governments, they're going to force to collapse because they got to adopt this lockdown policy. That was a complete disaster.
That is the great irony of these lockdowns, is that, Cuba, even some Latin American countries they couldn't take this, Robert. They couldn't take it.
Not at all. That's a good
why,
transition.
Though, you need someone to blame. Yeah.
So like Cuba, similar dynamic, and it is sad to watch the debate on Cuba. It has been for a long time.
Yeah.
In that you have the right-leaning version, which is everything's the fault of Castro or communists. And that isn't to say there isn't a lot of fault on Castro and communists. It just means that is sometimes an oversimplification of what's taking place in Cuba. And then you have the left, which is everything's the CIA in the U.S. If there's anything bad in Cuba, it's the CIA in the U.S.
It's the CIA in the U.S.,
And again, it's not like there isn't a lot to blame the CIA for, related to Cuba especially. But again, it doesn't fully explain the portrait. In fact, like I'm seeing Max Blumenthal and some other people, Jimmy Dore, go on about how this is even to some degree people at the gaggle shift too much blame on the U.S. for the Cuban current position. I have friends that are there on the ground and have for 20 years. And first of all, for a lot of Cubans, they're apolitical. It's like they're not sitting there thinking, well, I want this constitutional provision or that. That's not really the Cuban dynamic. The Cuban dynamic on the ground is very functional. Am I going to be able to eat? Am I going to be able to wear what I want? Am I going to be able to have a roof over my head? Am I going to be able to have electricity? Am I going to be able to have some sort of air conditioning of some kind when the summer gets bad? Am I going to have protection from a hurricane? Do I have some kind of meaningful expression in employment or education? Is my kid going to be safe? Is my health care going to be available? Basic stuff.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Robert. You cannot worry about self-actualization in the top when you haven't filled your basic needs.
Exactly. And that is what's governed when Cuba's in what's being missed right now is that Cuba was a country that could not afford a lockdown. It is entirely between at least 10%, and if you look at indirect revenues, probably up to a third of particularly their foreign currency, it comes from tourism. They shut down tourism for a year. They couldn't afford to do that. So so what's happened is, and they're a domestic service economy. In other words, between people within the same system. And if they shut that down, they're in huge trouble. So this was another place that was teetering on the edge. Economically, it stagnated for several years. It sort of had reached a peak. Obama kind of saved them. They got a lot of money from Cubans in Miami. I mean, Cubans were doing it for other reasons, but it was a massive injection of cash that they needed. Continued tourism. Tourism actually took a bit up, but then it sort of flatlined because Trump pulled back on those benefits. But they were kind of a flatlining economy where they no longer had the personal charisma of the Castros to save them. Mm-hmm. And we'll go into some of the polling data on what Castro was even at the end of his life. There were already weaknesses because there's massive generational gaps in Cuba.
This is the when we do show it to people. Just keep in mind, folks, this is what terrifies Democrats, and this no nation, state, group of people exposes the proponents of illegal immigration to be the biggest frauds they are than Cuba, and they would have generational problems if they would let in these people. But they
completely won't. And it's because, and I saw it, witnessed it. there multiple times. So I mean, you had the Cuba of the 50s, pre-Castro. Castro comes in 1959. The part of the population that liked that 1950s Cuba almost all fled. 10% of the Cuban population would flee within a couple of years of Fidel's rise. Yep. And so, like here, so this is a 2015 poll, and you can see basically the positive, negative feelings of Fidel. And it's important to emphasize, Fidel was by far the most popular leader in Cuba. So that's where, this was the peak. This would be the peak of support of the regime, would be when Fidel was in charge for Fidel himself. Once Castro was gone, because like in the early 90s, they faced a similar economic crisis after this short economic history. 1960s, Fidel keeps a mixture of small businesses, and only nationalizes the big industry and the big land, turns it to a communist country, but keeps small businesses until small businesses start smuggling in arms to try to whack Fidel. So he decides no more. In the 1970s, no more small business, shuts down tourism and visitation of the country, unless you're a communist country. The Soviet Union starts giving them huge amounts of cash in the mid-70s. And in the 80s, they're doing real well. I mean, relatively speaking. Then Soviet Union falls apart, collapses, 1989. Bye-bye, sugar mama. Their economy takes a 30% nosedive between 1989 and 1992. Castro used his personal appeal to the older generations and went out into the streets begging, saying, let me try to fix it, let me try to fix it. His personal charisma is the only thing that kept the regime alive. Otherwise, the regime would have collapsed in 1991 and 1992. He decides, he bites the bullet, says, screw it, I'm going to go into tourism again. And tourism saves him. He gets a bunch of foreign hotels to come in and put in a bunch of capital, opens his doors to everybody everywhere, allows local homeowners to rent out their rooms as a way to make supplemental income. He starts to create a little bit of a two-class system. And well, there was always a two-class system, but a two-class system, there was just military and police and government officials and everybody else. Now there became a three-class system, a kind of middle class, mini middle class that were involved in tourism, that were guides, that were promoters, that were renting out places, things like that. And, the selling knockoff cigars. You had a little bit of a quite criminal element start to sneak in. And it stayed solid. 2004, Castro gets hurt. He has to step back from the public limelight, but he still dominates the scene. Raul Castro was ruling in the name of his brother. It was his brother that kept. And what it is if you grew up in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, you had more positive views of Fidel. As I would talk to generations there, people grew up in the 80s, they had no love affair for Fidel. 90s, a lot of negative feelings about Fidel. And that only continued. The younger you got, the more anti-regime you got. Now, part of that is legitimate criticism of the regime, and part of it is naive idealism. A lot of the young people in Cuba think that Cuba would look like Miami if it wasn't for the regime. And that's where they're kind of naive. In other words, if Cuba tomorrow becomes capitalist, go back to the early 90s in Eastern Europe and Russia. That didn't quite look so pretty. In other words, they don't have enough natural resources to just become Miami.
Overnight.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of them believe that. That's where I've told people, if you're going to have a regime change, you need to figure out a way to balance expectations, because otherwise you're going to have people who will quickly shift and say, you know what? I mean, people forget in Russia. In 1993 in Russia, the Communist Party was increasingly the most popular party. I mean, it was quickly becoming that way. And by 1999, they would have taken over, but for Putin. The guy who killed the Communist Party was Putin. Which they kind of forget in the States, sometimes in the West. But the reason for that was they remembered stability, they remembered security, they remembered a bunch of things of the old regime that were then gone under sort of cowboy freewheeling, chaotic capitalism could look real ugly in Cuba. That's why it needs to be moderated and mediated. People really want to get rid of the current regime, but they need to figure out a new regime that doesn't create its own problems. But yeah, here you see massive gaps by sort of generational, relatively by generational support. There was bigger ones on some other ones.
Yeah, there are, and some of the other questions, you want me to pull them up too?
Yeah.
I think what we see there is like some nostalgia, some early Castro nostalgia, Max
which
mixed
is real.
with idealism.
There's a large number. I would say, if I were to break it down, that support the regime as opposed to Castro. That support the regime, you would have near majority support amongst seniors for the current regime, probably right now in Cuba. Everybody else, you would, and by the time you get to the millennials, it would be less than 20%.
Yeah, it's
so
like
I mean,
that working
and the
to
only
65 is bad.
Yeah,
that
the only people that are,
class,
if you're working for the government, the police, or the military, you're mostly pro-regime in that age group. Otherwise, for younger age groups, they're all anti-regime. That's why, when Max Blumenthal, other people were saying that these were CIA, no, they're not. Everybody knows the risk of public protests. Public protest is the one thing they don't do in Cuba. So to have that kind of mass public protest and broadcast it to the world means and it didn't surprise me, because I'd been hearing from people for months because of the lockdown that things were very, very, very bad. In other words, people like, I can't pay the electricity. I can't pay the rent. I can't pay this. People can't pay this in my neighborhood. We're only getting this kind of food. We're barely, it's just rice for a week. I mean, that kind of complaint.
Yeah, we heard a lot of, it's already limited food selection, but we heard a lot of really bad stuff. And then also, too, they have limit on utility usage, and they cut that.
it was no fan or air conditioning all night long. No lights in 2/3 of the city for half the day. Those kind of problems. And last time,
hot right now, Robert, it's hot right now.
The two other things, very hot. They're worried about hurricanes coming in. The other thing is, two other aspects. Last time what almost collapsed the system was the rise of crime. Because one thing, whatever you say about communism or Castro,
that's why he booted them out.
Yeah.
That's why he let them go and said, go to the United States. Get out of here.
Very, very low crime rate. Now, it's been rising. What's interesting is there is a correlation between class divisions and crime in Cuba. And I think part of it was this. It was very hard to commit crime in Cuba when everybody had the same things. And what people don't know is that they assign you your housing in Cuba. So in every apartment complex, there's a rat. There's somebody who watches everybody else for the government. So this is why.
Your folks sound familiar.
Exactly.
Got your mask on. Got your mask on, citizen.
We're trying to reinstate and institute the same set of ideas. To rat out your neighbor, be a rat today. I mean, remember the mayor of L.A., the openly saying that. So but they've institutionalized it in Cuba. And the problem was this. If everybody had access to only the same things, if you suddenly showed up with a new shirt or suddenly showed up with like a TV, everybody was like, where did you get that from?
All right.
So it was very hard to get away with crime. Once you introduced more class divisions where you could have a tourism economy, over the last 5 years, they've been allowing more restaurants, more local, you could design shirts, like basically a small business tourism driven industry. That was creating more class divisions, and that in turn made it harder to detect crime, which has led to the crime doesn't happen to tourists, it happens to the local population. And that happened in the early 90s, too, though not because of the small business reason, just because everybody was desperate. There was a good documentary guy that talked to these old small farmers that started to experience horrendous crime in the early 90s. And that almost collapsed the state. And then police corruption has been very rare in Cuba. Now, that's because Castro had if you got caught, you just got executed. That was it. End of story. So that did have a deterrent
I don't
effect.
mean to laugh, but sometimes
it did. I mean, there was a high-ranking general who was decided to hop in with the Colombians and the Sandinistas to help bring drugs in. Yep. Boom! He did a big show trial and whacked them. Having to do the show trial part, my guess is
everybody knew it. Yep.
We'll let your wife and kids go if you get out and humiliate yourself before we whack you. So because of it, and because there's such strict borders and such strict internal controls, particularly on currency, I mean, it's a great education about how governments really work, how Cuba's operated. Not only the surveillance part, but I was wondering, why is there no drug or alcohol problems in Cuba? Well, it's because they give you different currency to buy different things. So it's very cheap to go to a baseball game or to go to a movie or to go to a museum or to travel to a certain degree within the country. But it's incredibly, prohibitively expensive to buy one bottle of rum. And then drugs are almost impossible to import in the country in the first place. And then you don't have disposable income for it anyhow. And you couldn't do anything with the disposable income if you got it because they're going to know that something's AWOL. So because of that, very little drug problem, very little alcoholism, etc. But if crime starts to happen, if police corruption starts to happen, and it was getting worse over the past 10 years. I mean, I went from not seeing any violence in the streets at all to seeing mini riots just pop up here and there. And that was 5 years ago. Seeing no police corruption to seeing police corruption targeting tourists. I could watch it live time. And so once I saw that, I was like, man, this system, once Fidel's gone, all they need is one shock and it's going to collapse. And the irony is, like Max Blumenthal was blaming the CIA. Blame the lockdowns and your buddies on the left, Max.
Yeah,
because
man.
they're the ones. That was the shock to the system Cuba's government could not afford, was the lockdowns the left demanded they do in the name of protecting their health. Because it's such a statist mindset. We're so great. We protect. It's Munchausen syndrome. We protect. We make our people so sick that they're totally dependent on it. But here's a good example.
We've talked about that before. It does remind me of like a Munchausen's. It does.
That's the statist mindset, and I mean that's why disproportionately it's women who dominate the Cuban government. It's same reason why women dominate the Democratic Party, because it's that kind of mama state, maternal state approach. They're really doing this for your own benefit. I always tell my brothers, I'm not going to say it's my sister or some other people, but come out. They're always doing it for your own good. It's for your own sake. It's for your own benefit.
Damn it! Let me help you.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you complaining? Yeah, now you need a timeout.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's all for your own good. That's what it is.
Yeah, look at this. This is a nightmare for Democrats right here. Look at that last question. This is a freaking nightmare for them, Robert. People who think
here you see the real gap between the older gen, and this is 2015. So you're talking about people who born like over 65 were born.
Exacerbated now.
They remembered the at some level, or from their parents, the pre-Cuba Castro, pre-Castro Cuba. And this was for a working class generation that did not. And this is where some of the Cubans in America sometimes are naive. There's a lot of people in Cuba who are not happy with the Batista regime, and did welcome Castro coming in.
Did anybody else lose his audio, or is it just me? Anybody else lose his audio?
No, his audio's gone.
Hey, Robert, your audio's gone, buddy. Yep, everybody says your audio's gone. I didn't hear you either. Maybe some. You guys can't hear him? It just disappeared. Hey, Robert, your audio's gone. Yeah, see, I hear myself calling back now. Can you lower it, though, just so in case I can... What do people say?
Tell you in a second.
Yeah, they're saying your audio popped out of nowhere.
No Barnes. Barnes has no audio. F.
Yeah, it was weird. It just happened. It just happened.
Is he back?
Nope, not yet. I'll know when I'm...
Somebody said, speaking too much truth.
They killed you, Robert. They swatted your audio, buddy. Yeah, it disappeared.
CIA, cut him off.
I really wanted him to wrap that up. Because that was...
That was perfect.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. What do you want to do? I can't hear... Yeah.
Maybe...
Can't hear you. You want us to take... You want me to just take us out? Yeah, okay.
All right.
Hey, as always, the great Robert Barnes. Follow him, Viva BarnesLaw.locals.com. And look, there are a couple of things maybe I'll just real quick add to that. Because there was something else I wanted to show people. Will I have the time to do it? Well, I can do it if I pop my little thing on here just to show people. People who think that there should be other political parties in Cuba was a big deal, all right? And I thought it was a pretty big deal. By generation. So what, and I know Robert's thing is still there, but by generation, look at that difference. Look, I say this all the time because I can't stand like the Ann Coulter way of thinking. These would be, there's a reason why Donald Trump won Florida by such a big margin. And that margin did not come from white people. It came from these people. It came from the younger people. All right, and it came from those who left and then had children 20 years ago. You understand what I'm saying? And that if we were to open it up to even the people that are there now, it is a shrinking minority who like leftism. This would be a boom for the Republican Party. A boom. And not only that, they come in and they're opinionated. Cubans are very opinionated. And they influence other people around them. They do. If you don't think for a second there are enclaves in Miami where Cubans have convinced working Mexicans or working Puerto Ricans that maybe they should have went with Donald Trump this time, then you just never been to Cuban. You just never been to Miami. I don't know what to tell you. They're very opinionated and very community centered.
Yes.
And it's Democrats and those who are on the right who claim that they're just compassionate. Yeah, you're real freaking compassionate. Letting young girls get sexually assaulted on the way up so she can fold your laundry for you. You're real compassionate. You're a piece of scumbag trash who wants someone to fold their laundry for them on the cheap or mow their lawn. And you look the other way at the horrors of illegal immigration because you're a piece of trash. And you pretend to be virtuous over it. That's what you really are. Let me just drop that truth on you real quick. Nobody shows what a fraud those people are more than Cubans. Barack Obama actively tried to keep them out. They tried it before. That's why Cubans, by the way, started their relationship with Republicans. It was the Republican Party who welcomed them. Democrats didn't want them. They didn't want you. That's the truth. They did not want you. They were going to prosecute a governor for allowing you to stay. Remember the little boy in the 90s, folks? Bill Clinton. He wanted all Republicans helping him arrested. Mm-hmm. Why? Because you don't believe in you don't believe the lies. These lies are very new to a lot of naive Americans. These are very new lies to them. It sounds like a perfect utopia coming true. Mm-hmm. They got every answer for you. Like Robert was just saying, all we need for you to do is take a time out and shut up. We know what's good for you. They've heard this bull already. They know what it gets them. And they're going to teach their kids when they grow up what it got them. Man, they're generationally screwed from winning the state of Florida for 30 years. Coupled with Venezuelans, oh my God, no chance. No chance. There aren't enough white people who are willing to defect to the Democratic Party. The political class is not big enough. It's not big enough. At some point, you may even win Pinellas by 5 or 7 points and still lose the state. That's where Democrats would be. Why? Because you can't offset 350,000 net change in southeastern Florida. You can't do it. Numbers aren't there, folks. The numbers aren't there. So they're frauds. Total pieces of trash. People who really deal not with fake political persecution. I'm so afraid I gotta leave El Salvador. I gotta leave El Salvador to form a gang in Loudoun County. I'm so afraid. No. This is real. Oh my God, I can't even use the air conditioner now on Tuesdays? It's 110 degrees down here. Rice again? Freaking pork chop from time to time? Speak up, and they'll come and get you.
Don't you dare.
These people are actually trying to make a choice. I honestly have little sympathy for a lot of the other Latin American countries because they did this. They did this, and unlike Cubans, they don't even try to change it. They don't even try. At least there has always been an element in Cuba, who have been trying to change it for decades, despite grave personal risk. For that kind of person, you're a fighter. I want you. Mm-hmm. I want you. Not someone who rolls over or abandons his family. What kind of a man abandons their family to go work in the United States. Send for your wife and daughter later to have some coyote sexually abuse them across the border. I don't want people like that. I don't want them in my neighborhood. I don't want them in my community. I don't want them working on houses up the street. I don't want their kids in my school with my children. I don't want people like that. I want people who fight for their families, who fight for their communities, who fight for their way of life, who fight for their future, who fight for their government and love it every step of the way.
Amen.
There is nothing wrong with that. Nothing. And if they weren't the frauds they were, then it wouldn't be arbitrary. Who the hell can come here and who can't? The truth is, they promote illegal immigration from countries that are satisfied with leftism and will likely end up on the dole. And they actively fight legal immigration from countries, people who share American values. What the?
Fish and chips.
Fish and chips. Maybe that's why Virginia looks the way it did when we went over it last week. Maybe that's why Massachusetts looks the way it does now. A lot different. 30, 40 years we went over it last week. Of course that's why. I'm tired of this. The R word. Oh no, they'll replace your ass real fast. They're dying to. All right. Look, it's 4:10. Let's just bug out of here now that Robert's gone. Follow Robert, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, and of course on mine, peoplespundit.locals.com. Frank, I will be on Frank tonight. Political orgy. It's been a while since I've been on. Quite frankly, I'm telling you, at Political Orgy on Twitter, but the podcast is, quite frankly, very entertaining show.
Yes,
and it's been a while since I've been on with Frank, so I'm really looking forward to it. I saw him text to make sure to confirm, actually, before. Yeah, and then, no, not this Wednesday. Next Wednesday, I'll be on Sidebar with Viva, it looks like. And
yeah, because this Wednesday is Nico's birthday.
Wednesday, we'll have on, like I said, we're going to start having on people who looked at 2020 and said, you know what? It's time for me to get in. Got to go after Masters, too. We got to get him on. So
yeah.
we got to get Masters, we got to get Vance, we got to get them all. All these people who I know would not have jumped in if it wasn't for 2020, and it was like the third great awakening without religious connotations. All right? So with that, I'm going to bounce. Thanks, everybody, as always, for watching the show. If you donate to the Public Polling Project, bigdatapoll.com. Don't forget, even if you make yourself anonymous, to please put your comment in there. What would you like to see? Give us your ideas. Essentially, we aggregate them when the project is fully funded and the loudest voices get their way. So add your voice to it. All right. With that, I'm out of here. I'm kicking rocks.
Appreciate you. Thank you
Appreciate
for all your support.
Quite frankly, 7 o'clock, right?
Quite frankly, 7 o'clock. You're going to
7
be on
o'clock
the top
Eastern
of the
Standard
hour,
Time.
so, yeah.
Okay. Quite frankly, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Watch my Twitter feed. Watch my locals. I'll put it out. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't spoken to my friend Frank in a while. All right. All the best, folks. Thanks. See you tonight. Oh, don't miss Inside the Numbers on Wednesday. Last one. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
I love you.
Dan, 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 dan.